Good afternoon. My name is Nima Ardalan. I'll be glad to be bringing you another program from the SWANA Region Collective here at KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles. Today, we'll be talking about Northeast Syria or Rojava, or as us Kurds call it, Western Kurdistan. Attacks on the Kurds in Northeast Syria or Northern Syria have continued as the war continues in Ukraine. The world's attention is to Ukraine and the Russian conflict. As the protests in Iran continue, as Iran attacks the Kurds in eastern Kurdistan, again, Turkish attacks and drones continue to take its tolls on the civilians, on kids, on educators, on service providers in Rojava or northeast or northern Syria. As you know, KPFK is in fund drive. Before we start talking about the news in Rojava with our guest, Dr. Amir Sharifi, a professor and linguist at California State University, Long Beach, and the president of Kurdish Human Rights Advocacy Group in Los Angeles, let me turn to our own collective member, Ankine Asyan, to talk about what we have for you. And what we are trying to do is to keep KPFK alive, to keep this station going, to be bringing you these types of programming. Myself, I've been with this SWANA Region Radio Collective for over 20 years, actually 21 years now. And we have tried to bring you the voices of the voiceless. And we have covered a region that's not covered in the mainstream media. You don't hear talks about Rojava or Kurdistan or Artsakh or the conflict between Azerbaijan and the Lachin Republic. You don't hear about Turkish drone attacks on the Kurds. You don't hear about the continued Iranian bombing in southern Kurdistan or northern Iraq that Iran has been carrying on the Kurds. So I urge you, I beg you, please support this station. Ankine, welcome to the show and thanks for helping me with this.
Oh, thank you, Nima. So this week we will be offering a calendar published by the Palestinian Feminist Collective. A couple of weeks ago, we hosted the collective. We had the members on and we discussed their agenda and then what they envision. And so, but today we will be offering for a small amount of $65 one of the calendars. It's a perfect holiday gift for you or for your loved ones. Please consider ordering a copy of it. You can get this beautiful and informative calendar for just $65. It does feature 15 Palestinian artists, anniversaries and commemorations in Palestinian history, the names and contributions of 15 Palestinian women whose lives, contributions, and legacies valued by the PFC, the Palestinian Feminist Collective, and it is organized around 13 principles. So we will be offering that today.
Well, thank you very much, Ankine. Let me go to our guest today, Professor Amir Sharifi. Amir, welcome to the show. You're very familiar. You're not unfamiliar to us. We have had you on our show. And we wanted to talk about the current situation in Rojava or Northeast Syria. What is the latest? Why is these attacks continuing? I mean, what does Turkey want?
Yes, let me just reinforce basically the message that was basically given that really this radio station needs all the support that it could get from its listeners, primarily because KPFK was actually the first station and continues to be our voice, as you put it, the voice of the voiceless. And therefore, it is imperative that any support is given to the station to survive. At least I know that it is not thriving as it should be, in the midst of all this monopolies of media. And therefore, it is really important that such support is provided. Let's turn to the Rojava, which is even in worse shape than KPFK. And it does deserve all the support that it could get from the international community, from activists, from leftists, from anyone who is really interested in the maintenance of a feminist revolution. Let's not forget that the feminist revolution was, for the first time in the history of humanity, was triggered, was not initiated. It was initiated in Turkey in 2006, if I'm not mistaken, but in 2014, it was really PYJ, the People's Protection Units, that resisted, fought, fended, and finally defeated the Islamic State. Of course, free-minded men also fought along with them, but they had their own independent basic units, and they were successful in defeating ISIS with also help from the international coalition. And ever since, and if you recall, and those who don't, Turkey was really praying during that time that they were putting out a legendary, a heroic struggle against Daesh, ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. The Turkish state, Erdogan in particular, they were praying for their doom. Fortunately, that did not happen, and they were able, in a vacuum that was created, to create a plural democracy, a democracy that is based on ethno-religious diversity. It is based on popular, basically, votes. It is based on really co-management or co-autonomy of the region by women and men. And therefore, it is quite unprecedented. And historically, I would say this is really a citadel of feminist revolution in the world. And it is important that we support it. Anyone who considers himself or herself a progressive, this is basically a revolution which is in danger. Going back to your question, these attacks on Rojava by Turkey are not new. They definitely have occupied, you did not mention, for instance, Afrin. When it comes to places such as North and Northeast, basically, these are areas that the Turkish government has escalated, attacking not only basically civilians, but also SDFs, the Syrian Democratic Forces. About 60 to 70 people, civilians, as a matter of fact, were killed, and 50, if I'm not mistaken, I don't recall the exact numbers, but probably more than 30 people were injured. They have destroyed the infrastructure, the oil installations, the power plants, anything that basically a very aggressive government does before ground operations. They want to really destroy the foundation, including basically the chaos that they wanted to create. And that was basically the bombardment of the Al-Hol camp, where over nearly 60,000 ISIS prisoners are being held. Over definitely 5,000, close to 6,000 ISIS fighters. Obviously, when this was happening during the escalation, and that was last week, because events basically are going forward with sudden and swift momentum, it is very difficult to keep track of things, especially to keep track of events that happen on a daily basis. what was happening basically before in a decade or so, it is now happening, for instance, really in one day. So it seems that the escalation was really pre-planned, and Turkey, as usual, wanted to take advantage of the opportunity. Turkey is known for its opportunism, political, economic, its genocidal campaigns, and you have seen that basically in the case of Armenians. They really use they draw on these opportunities. So the plan was basically the escalation and destruction of the infrastructure, and then a ground operation. Obviously, the Rojava launched a massive campaign internationally in accordance with its demands from the allied forces. The whole operation that Turkey was leading really installed any attempt against ISIS, and they had to announce that joint operations against ISIS would be stopped until basically our forces feel secure to be able to fight ISIS back. And fortunately, in the past 2 days, the fight against ISIS and ISIS sleeper cells is on. So going back to your question, what is going to happen? What is happening? It has slowed down a bit, but it has not basically ended. International calls have been made. The hashtag no-fly zone has successfully been launched. Your listeners may want to know and to share basically this hashtag with them. I have personally written letters, petitions through Change and through Kurdish publications to international community, to the U.S. Secretary of State. So in Europe, there's also a more assertive basically fight to save and to safeguard basically this citadel of feminist revolution in the world. And I would say what is happening in Iran is not really separate from what has happened and what is happening in Rojava or Western Kurdistan.
Absolutely, very much related. Let me just remind our listeners that this is KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles, and you're listening to the SWANA Region Collective. And we are speaking with Professor Amir Sharifi, and my colleague Ankine Asyan is with us today. And as a reminder, the hashtags are no-fly zone for Rojava. This is what we are talking about. We are asking everyone to publicize this, and maybe at some point it will be listened to by powers that be. Now, Ankine, I believe you wanted to ask about the petitions that Professor Sharifi had circulated.
Yes, I was wondering if you can tell us more about it and how people can find it, if they are interested in signing it.
Yeah, there are two petitions actually, and one is a bit more recent, I guess, that we just did. We're asking U.S. President Biden and Secretary General Antonio Guterres about the attacks on Rojava. Also asking about a letter to Mr. Anthony Blinken, which Professor Sharifi wrote over the Turkish threats to Syria. So again, we have had several petitions. You can go on change.org, and we'll share the link in our podcast on our YouTube channel as well. Our YouTube channel is SWANA Region Radio, and we will share the links there for you. So asking Secretary of State Mr. Blinken to halt Turkish attacks on northeast Syria or Rojava. Dr. Sharifi, tell us about this.
Yeah, probably you are able to see the letter that I basically wrote and addressed Mr. Blinken over Turkish threats to Syria. And this was in the middle of basically the feminist revolution in Iran. And I wrote this as basically a Kurdish American and expressed my concern over what is going on, what has been going on. And the Turkish basically attacks, which I briefly just mentioned. As a matter of fact, as I said, it is the responsibility of the international community and those who really promulgate the notion of democracy, genuine democracy, including the United States and the Europeans who primarily believe that these principles have to be safeguarded. Let me see if I can go back to the actual size. Definitely Turkey has not hidden its plan. It wants ethnic cleansing, as it is called, in northeast Syria, as you mentioned. Like what they have done. They have created basically a total chaos, a ground for massive genocides, for massive displacements of the local population, as they did to the Armenians. And we have seen haunting images of what they have done: kidnapping, intimidation, destruction of homes, deforestation, pillage of the area. And they want to do that in the entire area in northeast Syria, what they have done in Afrin.
Yeah, you mentioned what happened in the Armenian genocide. Just in the city of Afrin, estimates as high as 300,000 people have been displaced. Kurds have been displaced. I've heard a number between 200 and 300,000. This just happened about 3 years ago. 4 years ago.
Actually, I forgot to mention, and when I say displacement, it is not just Kurds, Syriacs, Armenians, all those people actually who have for a second or a third time have been displaced, and they are refugees in these areas, and they are again under the threat of being displaced or being turned into refugees. So this is really a democracy, a plural democracy that I mentioned, that feminists have created in Western Kurdistan, and all ethnicities, including the Arabs, are also involved. And we have seen massive, really demonstrations of women in particular in these areas opposing these attacks and expressing their solidarity with the feminist revolution basically in Iran.
What kind of, Dr. Sharifi, what kind of a society has Turkey or Turkish-backed forces have created in Afrin? I'm wondering. It used to be a very multi-ethnic. There was no fighting there, no ISIS presence. It was probably the only part of Syria that was calm and relatively safe prior to the Turkish attack.
I would say, it is a jihadist kind of mentality. There is basically a semblance of a kind of a civilian civic life or civilization in Turkey because of the secularization of the Ataturk, who was basically a brutal dictator himself. But that secularism has basically persisted, but definitely there is this attempt on behalf of the Turkish government to raise the Turkish basically flag, the Ottoman basically flag, and to destroy any semblance of difference that it can find. And that's what they have done in Afrin, and that is what they want to do in the entire area. So it is quite ironic, for instance, that we, do not stop a native ally, which apparently is Turkey, but it has everything contrary to the beliefs and the values that, at least ostensibly, NATO basically enshrines in its principles. The Ukrainian case, I wrote basically a letter in support of the Ukrainian people, innocent, defenseless people, and I joined in their struggle. But definitely when it comes to the Western world and Europeans and the United States, it is imperative that these women basically are not left alone. Their fight is not left to the devices of Turkey. You know, as you mentioned, Afrin is really a good example of what is going to happen to the rest of not only Syria, northeast Syria, but the entire area of the Middle East, and I would say to Europe. This is unavoidable. If they do not stop Erdogan from its genocidal Islamist policies, that is the predictable pattern. We look back, we look at the past. What has he done in the past except basically leaving an endless trail of death, destruction, displacement, and this is what is going to happen in northeast Syria. That's why, you know, this letter was written. And the kind of appeal is here. As Kurdish Americans, we do not want to be a generation of Democrats and Republicans without democracy. And fortunately, you know, we do still have that democracy in this country. American tradition calls for taking care of those who took care of us. You can hardly find a Democrat or a Republican who is not pleased with the global role that women's protection units and men's protection units have played in defending ISIS. So I think on those principles, only broad basis of democracy, I'm asking them, or I am appealing to them to stop the Turkish madness, insanity, savagery, brutality. I cannot even find the language to define the really pernicious character of the Turkish state.
Let me ask you this: with what is happening with Rojava, the attacks on Rojava, just if you could just briefly answer this. This is pushing the Kurds closer to the Syrian regime because they have no alternative. They don't have an air force, for instance. They don't have tanks. And these attacks are pushing the Kurds to go. It appears that that's their only option. It's the only thing that they go. Is there some warming up of the relations? We only have a couple of minutes, and I think Ankine has another question for you.
Yeah, you know, this is an experience that they have had before. And definitely the Syrian government has no really decisive role to play itself because it has been sustained by repressive forces such as Russia and Iran. So in this situation, the Russians basically pretend to be supporting the Kurdish really cause. And they would say, we have nothing against you, but why don't you basically allow the Syrian forces to come back, in other words, to occupy the areas that you are controlling. And in many areas, to be honest with you, Syrian forces are present. It is just extending and expanding their presence. And I don't think
as a matter of fact,
non-Kurds and Kurds would be able to get anything out of this except basically the Russian complicity. They did the same thing in Afrin and everywhere else.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to add this to you. As a matter of fact, just either yesterday or the day before, Turkish attacks almost hit the U.S. patrol in the area. They have hit and injured and killed Syrian, I guess, guards. There are a few border guards still around Kobani, and as well as Kurds, non-combatants, obviously. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted sorry, if I could finish this sentence. You're right. Basically, you know, if there is no decisive action against the Turkish aggression, it will escalate. It has slowed down, but it has not ended.
Thank you.
Well, we just have about a minute left for the interview part of this show, but I want to ask you, so the United States has called on Turkey to halt its attacks. Has there been any sign after hostilities and attacks on Kurds easing up, or is this only to appease Europe?
That's a good question. I think, the United States and Europe, and of course, the Europeans follow the American, basically, example. And it seems to me that condemnation is not basically sufficient. Asking, basically, Turkey to show restraint as they have done in the past, it's not sufficient. Turkey should pay for the consequences of what it has done. So far it has done, let alone basically further invasion. So I would assume that nothing would stop Turkey unless draconian sanctions are used basically against them. And, it's, let's say, invulnerable position in NATO is seriously basically questioned. So that is not really sufficient. It's a positive step in the right direction, but as we have seen, it has not stopped basically Turkish aggression and ferocious attacks against Rojava and others. It will continue unless it is seriously stopped.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Professor Amir Sharifi.
Thanks very much. Now, I believe we have to go back to our listeners again. Thank you, Dr. Amir Sharifi, for being with us today. And again, tell our listeners that we appreciate you tuning in. But again, it is only with your generous donations, it is only with your help that this station, these types of programs can stay on air. Ankinit, tell us about our gift, please.
Yes, our gift again is a calendar. It was published by the Palestinian Feminist Collective, and it features 15 Palestinian artists. It also has anniversaries in it, commemorations in Palestinian history, the names and contributions of 15 Palestinian women whose lives, contributions, and legacies valued by the Palestinian Feminist Collective. And it's organized around 13 principles. So it's really each month is featured, features an artist. I have seen the calendar. It's really, the art is brilliant, and at the same time it's very informative. So so in addition to highlighting the brilliant artwork of Palestinian artists and acting as an educational tool, it amplifies important dates. So we are just asking $65 for this calendar. You can get one for yourself and maybe for your loved ones. This is the perfect time to get calendars, Nima, the end of the year.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. But I mean, if that's not something that you're looking for, don't forget, you can go to kpfk.org. You can go to our website, go under the donations, and check out the other gifts. For $50, you get the t-shirt any size. For $250, you can get the over 1,400 of historical archives, voices like Malcolm X, MLK, and many, many others. If any of these gifts appeal to you, please become a sustaining member. And we urge you, please do your best to support this station. Otherwise, we can't be on air.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, any amount is appreciated, any amount. If you give $10 a month, $20 a month, and become a member, become a part of the community of KPFK listeners. So if you have enjoyed and benefited from our programming over the years, whether by listening to our live broadcast shows or hearing them later on our podcast, please consider donating to KPFK's essential work. And the fund drive ends on Tuesday, so you have a few more days to do so in this year, in 2022.
Again, thanks to our engineer, Gary, for helping us today, and thank you for staying with us. Thank you.
So let me just do this one closing thing, Nima. I just want to say an extended version of this show and all our shows can be found as on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcast, Radio Public, Breaker. And you can also find us archived on kpfk.org.
Thank you.